r/nosleep. Hosted by you/horror-mode. I work as a receptionist at a hospital. A very strange woman walked in one night. If she asks you this one question, always answer no. Ah. What a pleasant way to begin my 3 a.m. shift at Mercy Hospital. The first thing I did as I sat down was cut my finger. It was a paper cut. And despite working at one of the largest hospitals in the state, I couldn't find a single band-aid laying around. I sucked on my index finger like a vampire while I scrambled my desk for that band-aid. I found one. Purple. I'm a hospital receptionist, and all that means is I greet visitors, make appointments, and look nice. Well, as nice as a 30-year-old man who hasn't slept in hours can look. That night, as we call it, it was just me and a few nurses on the floor. Other than that, it was ghost quiet. Except for the heavy rain. I sat back on the cheap recliner chair all receptionists get the honor of using. While adjusting my band-aid, I listened to the television mounted on the corner of the wall as it broadcasted a seemingly important message. Authorities say the woman was last seen on Cedar Avenue. I looked up to see if the television was showing any images of this strange woman. None. It was yet another crazy person with no name and no face who we were supposed to look out for. Not creepy at all. Authorities also say the woman was reportedly walking around and asking people very bizarre questions. I focused back on my desk and continued working, but still listened as the news anchor went on and on. She continued. The following statement was issued by an unidentified government official. Listen carefully, folks. Whatever she asks you, answer no. Do not, under any circumstances, answer yes. Officials won't comment further as to why, citing security clearance. Police are asking that you immediately call 911 if you deem anyone suspicious. I thought that part of the coverage was quite odd. But I wasn't sure anything could scare me anymore. Working here at the hospital, I thought I had seen it all. At the flash of the ruby red ambulance lights, I've seen people come in with severed arms, legs, fingers, people who somehow managed to scoop out their eyes, failed suicide attempts, and much more. You get used to it. My head was practically sunk into my desk as I filled out paperwork. That's when I heard something very subtle, initially. I heard it coming from the front doors, the entrance. The automatic doors opened and closed, slamming against each other and sounding an obnoxiously loud thud each time. The very dim lighting I had surrounding my desk flickered incessantly. Hello, I called out, seated behind the safety of my desk. Only the whistling wind responded. Hello, I called out again. I felt obligated to check if someone was there, especially since it might have been someone who was injured and needed our attention. I reluctantly picked myself up from my chair and walked over to inspect. I nearly slipped and cracked my head open as the entrance floor was almost flooded from the rain. I noticed footsteps, wet shoe marks that seemed to come inside the hospital and then back out. I stood near the doors, poking my head outside, and looked. All I heard were the distant sounds of sirens and honking cars. The rain poured harder. The peace and quiet was disturbed within moments of me sitting back down. The automatic doors started again, opening and closing, slamming shut and letting in more rain as they did. But this time, I heard gentle footsteps make their way towards me, tapping closer and closer. Someone slowly emerged from the darkness between the entrance and front desk. A woman with drenched black hair approached, wearing a dark brown raincoat and a pair of boots that were too large for her toothpick legs. Her face was inundated with wrinkles and wet makeup, her black eyeshadow smudged. Despite the heavy rain outside, she didn't seem to have bothered wearing her hoodie. Hello. How can I help you, ma'am? She didn't respond. She looked around, scanning and observing an unimpressive hospital. Is there something I can help you with? Still nothing. We engaged in a brief stare down, which she won. I looked down and pretended to gather important paperwork. Are you here to visit someone? Then finally, she responded. Without talking. She simply nodded and then took a few steps forward, her hands hanging down her side. Her posture was unnatural, almost uncomfortable. Okay, for now, I need you to sign here. Then you'll have to wait a few hours for visiting time to begin, I said, pushing forward a sheet of paper and pen. She raised her arm to sign and then abruptly stopped. She seemed startled by something on the desk. She looked at me, tilted her head and, with a smile that was as wide as her eyes, said, "Would you please move that for me?" I was confused at first, and then she pointed at it with her index finger, as drops of rainwater tapped against my desk while her arm hovered over it. I took the little crucifix we had on the front desk and put it in a drawer. The woman proceeded as if she was going to finally sign the paper and then stopped before writing anything. She dropped the pen on the ground and stood there again, staring at me. She asked me a question. Do you reject the Trinity? I'm sorry? I replied. For a few more uncomfortable moments, the woman stood there like an ancient statue. I had no idea what she meant by the question. Ma'am, who exactly are you here to see? Family, friend? What's your relationship with the patient? Before I could finish talking, midway through my question, the woman turned around and walked out the door, still smiling, and her eyes as wide as I'd ever seen on a person. I went back to work and tried to move on, but her creepy mannerisms were trapped in my mind throughout the night. At around 4 a.m. I spotted one of the children in our hospital walking down the hallway. Nina? Is that you? I called out. All the kids in the hospital knew me. I was proudly considered one of the cooler employees. I let them break the rules, I brought them snacks upstairs, and even told them scary stories, despite their predictable regret later on. The nurses would get angry with me every time I held one of my scary story nights. They always had a bunch of bed sheets to change the next morning. I only did these things for the kids when I wasn't busy, when it was a quiet night. And this was one of those uneventful nights, which of course was a good thing. Anyway, it was very odd to see Nina awake at that time, walking down those shadowy halls. She was absolutely terrified of the dark, and yet there she was. Nina, is that you? I squinted my eyes as I walked towards her. Sorry, Matt, she began, I don't want to be there anymore. She had dragged her blue blanket along with her, which was her way of gesturing to the staff that she wanted to move to another room. The other kids bothering you again? I asked. I took hold of her hand and began walking her back to the elevator. Matt, please don't make me go back up there. I don't like the new nurse. I stopped walking. What? I said, kneeling to Nina's level. She keeps asking us the same question over and over. I said no, so many times. I kept telling her no. But everyone else kept laughing with her and saying yes to her. Please, I don't want to go back up there. Nina's words immediately played flashbacks inside my tired, overworked mind. Something about a strange woman going around and asking even stranger questions. I didn't pay enough attention to that broadcast to notice the woman, but even if I had, I thought she had left the hospital. I ditched the elevator and ran up a flight of daunting stairs, stomping against each step with all the force I could muster. I probably woke up all those sleeping employees, I was so loud. I opened the door to the children's room and couldn't believe my eyes. I checked each room. Each one on each floor. I woke up my coworker and asked about the children. She couldn't find them either. We looked everywhere and put the hospital on lockdown. We set off all possible alarms and other emergency procedures. We didn't find them. They just disappeared. Posted by /horror_mode. My friend doesn't allow anyone inside her home after 9:30 p.m. I recently found out why. The happiest couple I've ever met, the couple to give hope to anyone who didn't believe in love, came crashing down from their happy, cloudless, blue sky. And it all began with an old, bitter woman. I arrived at JC's house 5 p.m. sharp. She's always obsessing with time, questioning why you're a minute late or a minute early, as if she's a detective and you're in her interrogation room. A young woman with pitch black hair, dark clothing, a nose ring and a few tattoos to go with it all. Her home decorated not too differently from herself, with pumpkins sitting on the porch in September, black wind chimes, and a very welcoming rug at the doorstep that reads, "Leave now." I felt special being the only person she trusted. Still, it took me a few knocks and even a reluctant ring of the doorbell to get her to answer. "Hey," I began, ending the awkward stare down she always initiated when that door opened. "Ralph," she said smiling, "how are you?" "Good. Good. Yourself?" She took a moment to trace the floor with her left foot. "Good. JC and I had planned a movie night. Well, as long as the movie wasn't too long, as she never allows anyone, even me, inside her home after 9:30 p.m. My nostrils were introduced to the scent of a fresh batch of cinnamon cookies. I had hoped that they were for us, but JC brought back a bowl of popcorn and soda for the movie instead. Which was fine. I certainly wasn't going to complain and then end up losing her trust for the next 2 decades. The movie ended. We thought Halloween 2 was okay. I gave myself a little tour while JC went upstairs to find another movie. I was glad she was willing to watch another, that she was beginning to open up and let her friends back into her life. I guess the boredom from all the loneliness she's been experiencing the past few years finally got to her. Maya caught a picture framed above a fireplace, of JC and her ex-boyfriend, Tyler. No one knows what happened between them. All we know is that one day they were together and the next day they weren't. After the breakup, Tyler simply disappeared and no one's seen him since. And the aftermath shows, it shows in JC's eyes. Saw 4? JC waved a DVD from atop the stairs, awaiting my response. Sure. Somehow, over and despite the gore of Saw 4, she slowly drifted away into a deep sleep. I wasn't really paying much attention to the movie anyway, so that was fine. And it was about time for me to leave soon. I made my way over to the kitchen for a glass of water. I noticed the time, 9:15 p.m. I thought I better get going soon, even if JC wasn't going to wake up in the next 15 minutes. I told myself that I'd wake her before I left out of respect for her rules. I noticed a tray of cinnamon cookies on the counter and figured she wouldn't notice one missing anyway. I looked down the hallway before turning the sink on to see JC still asleep. I didn't want to make too much of a ruckus washing my hands. But it was not the sound of running water that woke her up. It was my scream. As I washed my hands, I made out the face of a man in the window in front of the sink. I jumped back in shock, with JC already running into the kitchen with questions. What? She demanded to know. Call the cops, I said. Someone tried to break into your house. I saw him through the window by the sink. What did he look like? I don't know. Definitely a man though. I think he was white. She burst out in sudden laughter. No more movies tonight, Ralph. Time to go, she said in a condescending tone. She didn't believe me. Or she wasn't taking it seriously. I'm not leaving you here. You're not staying here alone. I'll be fine. Not happening, I sternly interrupted. JC finally noticed the time. Her expression suddenly turned serious and she uncrossed her arms. Oh, no, Ralph, you have to go. You have to go. Now. I poked my head to the side, looking out the kitchen. I saw the same man, through the living room window this time. Fuck. Holy shit, call the cops, he's right there. JC looked back, she saw him too. A very loud and violent bang against the door rumbled throughout the house. She ran for the front door to make sure it was locked. Except, she actually ran for the front door so I wouldn't look through the peephole. Move. What are you doing? We gotta see this guy's face so we can describe him, I said. Ralph. What? Move. Ralph, please. Confusion hit me. Why won't you move, JC? Tears ran down her face, followed by trails of black eyeshadow. She seemed hopeless, like she had just given up, like she was finally ready to tell me something. Isaac, do you remember that old woman? The one Tyler and I. She covered her right hand with the sleeve of her sweater and dried her face. The one me and Tyler visited? Yeah. Okay. What about her? JC and Tyler were as open-minded as they come. They dipped their toes into diverse pools of knowledge. Knowledge in religion, culture, science, you name it. They studied Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and anything else that sparked their interest. Which is why, at the request of a former friend, they decided to meet with a woman who claimed to possess certain abilities. A very old, serious, gray-haired woman whose shoulders almost met the back of her neck. This woman lived up in a mountain, in absolute isolation. Although open-minded and always willing to listen, JC and Tyler couldn't help but laugh at the woman, who claimed to be one of the last people on earth who knew how to practice real witchcraft. The woman did not react mercifully at their mocking and, supposedly, proved to JC and Tyler that she was in fact very real. It was a running joke that JC would tell us from time to time, even when Tyler left. They broke up immediately after meeting that old woman, but no one seriously thought that that was their reasoning. JC? She looked up at me, still leaning against the door. What about the woman? What the hell does she have to do with anything that's happening right now? The tears started again. Then, another very, very loud bang against the door. It was so strong that it rattled the locks and even shook some picture frames on the wall out of place. Holy shit. Okay, JC, move. Fucking move now. I gently moved her away from the door so that I could see through the hole. Ralph, please. I saw the stuff of nightmares. A man on the ground, standing on all fours. That is, standing on his legs and hands, his crooked head looking up at the door, shifting fast. Shifting inhumanly fast. His eyes were pitch black, like JC's hair, and he was completely naked, with his ribcage poking against his skin. He was standing so close to the door that I was able to see every little detail. Then he, or it, opened its mouth to reveal cat-like teeth. I jumped back as it began to bang its head against the door again. I looked at JC, awaiting an explanation. She just looked back at me, as if expecting me to figure it out myself, like I was supposed to know. Then she ran to the kitchen, and she came back with the tray of cinnamon cookies she had baked earlier. She placed her hand on the doorknob while using the other to carry the tray. They're still his favorite. What are you doing? Don't open the door. She opened the door and walked outside, closing it behind herself. I looked through the peephole, then ran to the living room to get a better look through the window. She was feeding it the cookies and petting it on the head. It rubbed against her legs. She kissed it on its forehead while it consumed everything she placed in front of it. Then, in a sight that made me jump back from the window, it suddenly ran off into the woods, moving incredibly fast. I just stared at JC as she walked back inside. She froze by the staircase, still waiting for me to say something. By then, I had figured it out. And I let her know that I had. Tyler always did like those cookies. Posted by /horror_mode. I interviewed a psychopath. It was my last interview ever. Mr. Woods, I'm Detective Brandon Hill. He simply stared. The occasional flickering of the fluorescent lights above us served as a reminder of our department's budget. We had caught him moments ago, lurking around a school by Riverport. For God's sake. You've been arrested for the murder of 7 individuals in the Riverport area. I tapped my index finger on my tongue and passed some files across the table that contained images of the victims, gruesome ones. He looked down and gazed at them, as if reliving them. He looked proud. Tell me, I began, scooting my chair closer to the cold, steel table between us. Looking at all this, how do you feel? He remained silent for a moment that felt like an eternity with him. He smirked. Then, still seated and still smirking, he very slowly leaned forward and lowered his head until his chin barely touched the table and, his eyes glaring up at me, replied. Feel? I gulped louder than I should have. Yeah, how do you feel about what you did? What does that mean? I realized the ridiculousness of the question. I was talking to someone who had the same emotional reaction murdering people that I do swatting flies. Still, he was playing with me. I don't understand the question, detective, he continued, trying to hide his smile. Keith Woods was one of the most clean-cut persons I had ever met. His pitch-black hair slightly sloped across his forehead and almost met his thick eyebrows. His fingernails trimmed perfectly and his face spotless and filled with youth. He wore a white dress-up shirt and black jeans. I didn't want to begin to imagine where his tie was. What he might have used it for. I continued my questioning. We don't often get young men sitting here, especially ones who just graduated with their masters. In an interrogation room. Cuffed. I sat back with my arms crossed, awaiting his response. His white buttoned-up shirt almost glowed against the lights in the room. I sat there for a moment and imagined, not a single stain or speck of dust on it. But in reality, he was colored in his victim's blood. Just thinking of that white shirt plastered in red. Appearance truly is everything. I did not ruin my life, he answered. Can't say the same. He suddenly burst out in an obnoxiously loud laughter, akin to that of a hyena. I was not amused, and neither were the officers watching from the other side of the one-way mirror. I recollected the files I had put before him, going through the images for myself one last time. One in particular challenged my ability to keep my professionalism. A 19-year-old boy, Thomas Goodman, beaten to death. Mr. Woods had an envelope delivered to the boy's parents on Christmas morning. For anyone who dares to question my ability to keep myself in check in the face of evil, remember that one. Could you hold back? I continued my questioning. Mr. Woods, tell me about Jessica Lopez. A small grin appeared on his face. He sat back and tapped his shiny loafers against the floor, as if thinking. What about it? What did you do to her? Do you remember? Of course I do, detective. In fact, he opened his mouth and picked at his teeth, the chains to his cuffs rattling. I can still taste her. I sat back and waited for him to regain his composure after he spent a good minute laughing like a lunatic. In the 20 years I've been doing this, I've never met a more vile monster. Not in my life. I just wanted to reach over the table right then and grab him by his skinny throat. You never would have guessed him of all people capable of something like that, and that's what's truly horrifying. He was young, clean, teeth as white as snow, and well dressed. All complete with a touch of cologne, just to fool you a little further. Keith. Ooh, first name. How up close and personal of you, detective. His eyes widened, disturbingly so. He was having fun now. This wasn't an interrogation anymore. But could you blame me for failing this interview? How do you even begin to intimidate evil itself? I continued. You leave behind an envelope. To the families of the victims. They have a red spot, or mark, on them. We ran some tests in the lab and learned that these red markings are from the respective victim's blood. Correct? He simply nodded, seemingly unimpressed with our discovery. It was like he was waiting for us to catch up with him. Like he was the teacher and we his disappointing students. Bastard. The door behind me opened. Detective, you've got a phone call. I got up and walked out the door, pausing for a moment to snatch another look at Mr. Woods. He looked right back at me and tilted his head like a confused dog, minus the creepy smile. I picked up the phone. I'm at work. What is it, Lori? Brandon, hello? Yes, honey, it's me. What is it? Sorry, I didn't want to bother you. But, I found an envelope sitting at the door and it's got this huge blob of red paint on it. I have no idea. Is it from your work? Also, Michael hasn't come home yet. High school ended hours ago. I dropped the phone at the most hideous and vile laughter from the interrogation room that I had ever heard. Posted by /horror_mode. I read bedtime stories to my kids. One of the stories scared me the most. One more story, one more story. Please, Dad. Julius and Rachel cried out to me. I let go of the doorknob, then turned their bedroom lamp back on and walked over to Rachel's bed, sitting back down at the end of it. Okay, one more. But that's it. Last one, I said as they simultaneously nodded their heads at me. I never understood children and their drug-like addiction to scaring the hell out of themselves. My children, Julius and Rachel, love scary stories. They can't sleep without hearing a few, and this was one of those nights. I had just finished reading 3 of them. One was about a ghost, another about a vampire, and then a story about a house cat that could transform into a lion and devour its enemies whenever it pleased. That last one scared even me. No, not that one, Dad. We want that one over there, Rachel said, pointing to the closet. I opened the closet to find a book sitting atop a counter. It was completely white, with nothing on the front or back. No words, no images, nothing. I used my thumb to rapidly flip through its pages. It let out an odor that clearly indicated its old age. And while flipping through the book, it had no words. It was empty. Each page was completely blank. Honey? I said, still looking through the mysterious book. There's nothing here. Where'd you get this book anyway? I don't know. Ask Julius, he's the one who brought it home. Okay, well, nothing to read here, kids. It's completely blank, I replied, still flipping through its white pages while sitting at the end of the bed. Julius came up to me. Here, Dad, let me show you. Rachel and I sat and watched as Julius took the book from my hands and placed it down on the bed. We want a witch story. My son yelled with his left hand placed on top of the book. Okay, Dad. You can read now, he ended, climbing onto the bed and sitting crisscross next to his sister. I paused for a moment with a confused expression on my face, and then I opened the book. There were words now. Entire paragraphs. I thought that I had somehow missed a section of the book, but at the same time I was quite certain that I had gone through all its pages. Okay, guys. Last one, I slowly uttered, still confused. Ready? I began reading to them. There once was a woman who lived on the slopes of a dark and misty mountain. From time to time, the villagers would summon the isolated woman by sacrificing one of their own people to her. The younger the sacrifice, the quicker the woman would come. The villagers called upon her for help. They called upon her to stop impending storms, plagues, diseases, and any other disaster that would come upon them. They named her the evil savior. On one dreadful day, the village was invaded by wild, rabid animals. People were being torn apart and eaten, with livestock consumed alongside their owners. The villagers had no choice. They could not wait any longer, lest every person in the village be consumed. They needed the woman to come quickly, so they sacrificed. I stopped reading, slamming the book shut to the disappointment of my 2 children. What kind of story? Okay, I said sternly, that's enough. This is inappropriate for you guys. But, Dad, please. We want to hear more, Rachel whined. I got up from the bed. No. I told them to go to sleep and took the book with me. As I sat in the kitchen going through the mysterious book late into the night, there was a loud knock at the front door. But when I opened it, no one was standing on the porch. Nothing. Just the sound of the wind along with some hooting owls. Dad. I ran to my children and swung their bedroom door wide open, hitting it against the wall. What? What is it? But they were asleep. I stood there and scanned their bedroom, my eyes steering left and right. Everything seemed to be fine, so I began to slowly close the door. And that's when I heard Julius whisper something. What? I replied. Julius? Was that you? I thought you were asleep, buddy. I didn't want to turn the bedroom light on and wake Rachel up, so I had to squint my eyes through the darkness to see my son. He sat up in his bed, his body a silhouette in front of his moonlit window. Dad, he whispered, gesturing with his hand for me to come closer towards him. I sat on his bed. What is it, buddy? You should go to sleep, you have school tomorrow. You know that, right? He paused for a moment, occasionally poking his head out to see the hallway behind me. I looked back at the open bedroom door, confused as to why he kept looking there. Dad, he began, she said we're not safe here. What? Who told you that? He poked his tiny head from his bed again to look behind me towards the hallway, at the end of which the front door of the house is visible. She said someone is coming for us, Dad, Julius whispered. And she said the only way to stop them from hurting us is by giving her something. His gentle, eerie words sent chills down my spine. But a moment after he said that, something else happened that absolutely petrified me. There was another ferocious knock at the front door. Hosted by /horror_mode. We had an exorcism for my sister, but something worse happened. My mother died when I was 6. No one knew what happened. She's survived by the 3 of us, my dad Nathaniel, my sister Chauncey, and me, Lucas. We were never religious until we were compelled to be. I once read a story on Reddit about a lonely man who didn't believe in God. Until one night, when he found himself gazing at a skinless, black figure with no eyes standing by his bedroom door. In that moment, he said, he had no choice but to pray to God. My dad and I have no idea how Chauncey came to be possessed. Yes, that's right. My sister was possessed by a demon at one point in my life. My uncle and a neighbor were present during the exorcism. We needed the muscle. Father Elio arrived at 10 p.m. Father, bless you and thank you for coming, Uncle Roland said earnestly. He took the priest's coat and closed the front door immediately so as not to allow the night's cold breeze inside. Our home was cold enough. Nathaniel, everything is going to be fine, Father Elio reassured the mess that was my dad that night. I had never seen my dad sob like that before. His face was as red as a tomato, but every time he caught me looking at him, he pulled himself back together. Father Elio scanned the room in a manner that I can only describe as authoritative. My dad wasn't in control, and my uncle wasn't either. No, it was Father Elio who was in control. And you are? Oh, I'm their neighbor, John. Thought you guys could use some help. That's kind of you, John. God bless you for this, said Father Elio approvingly, nodding his head. John smiled and seemed to blush like a girl. He's a Catholic man himself. Father Elio is a tall man who stands at 6 feet and 2 inches. He had that salt and pepper colored hair that indicated his older age, along with the wisdom that comes with it. Before we go upstairs. The sound of something like heavy furniture moving interrupted Father Elio. All of our eyes snapped up at the closed bedroom door upstairs. My dad motioned to run up there and check on my sister, but was stopped by Uncle Roland, his brother. Once again the sound of heavy objects in motion rumbled throughout our 2-story home. John made the sign of the cross in fear. Sometimes, when I think back on this night, I laugh to myself. Poor John, who was just trying to be a good neighbor, was absolutely petrified, even though he came over voluntarily. And the thing is, he wouldn't leave no matter how scared he was. After all, Father Elio gave him that honorable compliment. What would he think of John if he just got up and booked it? Before we go upstairs, you should all be informed on some matters. Time is not on our side tonight, so I cannot explain everything, but I will tell you this. You must not, under any circumstances, speak to it. You are not speaking to Chauncey, you are speaking to evil. And you should never speak to evil, whether it asks you a question or taunts you, or whether you yourself wish to ask or taunt it. Simply don't speak. We all nodded our heads and everyone seemed to take the father's warnings as common sense. He continued. Stay away from the window. Again, we all agreed to obey. Now, before we go upstairs, I must warn you of one other thing. Father Elio took a few steps forward and gestured us to come closer. Is there anything that anyone wishes to confess right now? We traded looks of confusion with one another and then set our eyes back on him. You see, demons are spirits, and as such they know things beyond our comprehension. They don't know everything. No, only God Almighty knows everything. However, for some reason, they know of certain things you may have done throughout your life, and the only way to keep them from exposing those things is to confess that sin. I can't tell you the many times during exorcisms when the deepest and darkest secrets of those in the room were exposed by demons. For some people, it brought them great shame. For others, it ruined their lives. However, if you confess your sins with me, which we can do right now in the kitchen, then that demon upstairs, or any other evil spirit in that room, has no right to accuse you before God. So please, for your guy's sake, let's get this done. One by one, we walked over to the kitchen and Father Elio heard our confessions. It took about 15 minutes. Then we headed upstairs. The bedroom was made as empty as possible except for a table Father Elio needed for his things, holy water, Bible, crucifix and whatnot. Chauncey wasn't restrained with ropes as my dad wouldn't allow it. Uncle Roland and John were kneeling down on either side of her bed and holding on to her wrists. Time was not wasted. Father Elio stood over my sister and began praying, switching words between English and Latin. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. My dad began crying for my sister as she resisted the words of the priest. She spat on his purple stole and cursed him, saying and uttering things so perverted and so evil, all in a voice unlike that of a 19-year-old girl. My dad scratched at his white-brown patch of a beard in distress. "Stop it. That's enough, Father," my dad suddenly cried out. Uncle Roland gestured to me with a nod of his head to go and comfort my dad, as he and John couldn't let go of my increasingly violent sister. But John almost did let go. Chauncey slowly turned her head towards John, her eyes wide and her lips forming an uncomfortable smile on her pale face. "John the cheater. John the cheater. You lying pig," Chauncey yelled at the top of her lungs. Her words echoed loudly against the wooden walls of the empty bedroom. "You gonna tell your wife, Johnny boy? You gonna tell her what you did with Michelle from work?" John looked up at Father Elio for reassurance, trying to remember and heed his words from earlier. John put his head down in shame, still gripping Chauncey's left wrist. "Was it true? Did John cheat on his wife? I don't know. But man's reaction to strangers exposing their secrets is often telling. And John's reaction was very telling." Father Elio flicked more holy water on my sister's face, reminding us all to remember what he said earlier. Ignore. Just ignore. One moment during the exorcism, Uncle Roland and I caught eyes. He didn't look confident anymore. His big, hazel eyes became watery, and a few tears raced down his cheeks. He had taken off his jacket before preparing to restrain Chauncey, only to reveal a sweat-dampened shirt. With one hand, he reached for his ball cap and put it back on, lowering the top to cover his eyes. He looked as if he was preparing for something. He looked guilty. Chauncey began screaming and throwing violent fits, and if a complete stranger had entered the room at that moment, they would have chuckled to themselves before dismissing the scene as a film shoot. Father Elio asked us all to pray with him as he picked up a metal crucifix. We all did as he told us and prayed under our breaths, with the voice of the Father leading. Chauncey twitched her head towards Uncle Roland, who was looking down at the mattress as he prayed. He tried to ignore her. We all tried to ignore her. Well, it would be more appropriate, but I could never bring myself to call my sister that, no matter how unrecognizable she was that night. I knew she was still in there. Chauncey spat on Uncle Roland's face. "Pig. Why don't you tell everyone here what you did last night?" She looked around, scanning the room with a grin on her face. She looked like a child who was eager to share her newly found secret. "Disgusting, folks. It's disgusting," she said while laughing, but in a deep voice akin to that of a heavy-built man. Uncle Roland looked as if he was ready to get up and leave. But he didn't, and thank God for that. Father Elio had warned us to confess all of our major sins. If not, he explained, then the unconfessed sin, having not been forgiven by God, could possibly be available to the demon for exposing. And not just before God, who sees all, but also before our fellow man. I, for one, confessed all my major sins that night in the kitchen. I hadn't done much at 17. The demon was torturing Uncle Roland, mentally. It wouldn't tell us what he had done that was so disgusting. Instead, Chauncey, or it, kept threatening to reveal his secret to the entire room, but would stop and say, maybe in another 30 minutes. The doorbell rang from downstairs. "Don't," Father Elio warned sternly. "It's playing tricks, trying to distract us. No one is there." My dad stood near the open bedroom door, almost hiding behind it, he was so scared. "Father Elio?" Chauncey said suddenly. "What about you? Nothing to hide? Hypocrite. You creatures are not so different, if not even worse than us. That's why God throws you in hell along with us. You're not above us. See? You're pade." Chauncey's eyes widened abnormally. Her mouth remained open as she cut herself off from finishing that sentence. Her thin eyebrows rose and her head shifted slowly to the left. She was looking at my dad. Our dad. The room fell silent. And it remained silent for a few moments, until Chauncey finally spoke. "You sick bastard," she said with a mild chuckle. She opened her mouth as if to gasp. "Like I said, folks. We aren't so different." My dad was shaking. Uncle Roland and John kept restraining. And Father Elio continued praying. Oh, this one I shan't keep to myself. Nay, I say," Chauncey yelled excitedly. Goodness, it was weird, seeing my sister act like that. I knew it wasn't her, but it didn't fail to irk me anyway. She continued. "Lucas, you're such a good boy. Look at you. All sparkling clean after your little confession downstairs." Then, she looked straight at me, lowering her eyebrows. "I'll get you next time. But for now, I want you to ask our dad Nathaniel hiding behind the door over there what I'm talking about." "Lies." My dad suddenly screamed. "Father of lies. Isn't that right, Elio? Isn't that right? The devil is a liar. He's a liar. How can we believe a word that comes out of his rotten mouth? How?" My dad's reaction. It was telling. He made the same face and had the same mannerisms of Uncle Roland and John, but more extreme. And although the devil is indeed the father of lies, our actions speak louder than anything that could have slithered out of that demon's mouth. "Dad? Are you okay?" I asked. "Whatever it says, we'll just ignore it. Okay?" I looked over at Uncle Roland and John. There was no need to look at Father Elio, who, throughout the exorcism, seemed disappointed in us. He did warn them to confess, after all. "Nathaniel," Chauncey said tauntingly. "Are you ready?" My dad was pulling at his hair. His face was a deep red and spit came from his mouth with every word. He looked just as possessed as his daughter was that night. "Fuck off. Fuck off. It's not true. Shut up. Dad, please. Calm down. Just tell us what it is before she does. Get in front of this, Dad," I cried out. We ignored Father Elio and his repeated reminders not to speak with the demon. My dad fell to his knees, with a floorboard sounding a single, quiet creak. "It was an accident, okay? I didn't mean to do it, but she made me so angry. Son, surely you know that. Surely you know I didn't mean to take your mother away from you. Boo, but she made me so angry. So fucking angry. We were in the garage one night, and that's when I had to do it. I was fed up. So I grabbed a hammer from the toolbox and that was the end of it. To think I've been living under the same roof with a murderer. I'll spare you the rest, and in doing so I will have spared myself." My dad's confession to murdering my mother was shocking, and my sister and I haven't recovered since. But it didn't have to happen. Demons are tricky. They're playful, too. And if they can get you to admit to something wicked you've done, something that they didn't even know about, it's all the more fun to them. After Dad had finished his half-sob and half-anger-induced confession, the demon spoke through my sister one last time before finally leaving. "Nathaniel, I had no idea you murdered your wife, silly. I was just going to tell everyone about that one time when you used God's name in vain." Posted by you/HorrorMode. I'm trapped in an elevator with 4 people. It's been descending for an hour. Please get this out to my family. I titled this post beforehand in case something happens and I have to post it quickly. As I write this, the elevator begins to descend with greater velocity. It began as a joke, but I should have known better. I should have known by the looks of the building and the atmosphere that surrounded it. But instead of turning back, to my parents, my brother, my sisters, I walked inside, like a naive teenager does. My ears are ringing. They're beginning to hurt, almost bleed even. The others in here with me won't stop screaming. Altogether there are 5 of us. We're hoping, some of us praying, having been made believers out of this, that the lack of oxygen kills us before we reach wherever this thing is going. It's been slowly descending for almost an hour now, gradually picking up speed. I don't know how that's possible unless it's descending somewhere very, very deep. I'm surprised I have service. God bless Beelzebub Mobile, I guess. Who knows where it's taking us? The crying stopped and everyone seems to have accepted their fate. The only woman in here is pregnant. She's holding her boyfriend's hand, saying some prayer in what sounds like Spanish. One man is quietly sitting in a corner with his head down. The other is still banging against the walls of the elevator in a futile attempt to save us all. And I'm on my phone, typing this. I hope it reaches someone. I don't know what brought the others here, but I'm assuming their reasons aren't too different from mine. Curiosity. Or maybe, like me, someone dared them too. I don't know, I didn't ask. It all happened so quickly that we didn't even have time to react, let alone talk. We thought it was just some Halloween prank, but we're beginning to think the legend is true. We must be on floor negative 700 or something. The elevator stopped showing us which floor we were on a long time ago. The numbered lights above the doors just flickered then stopped working altogether, along with the rest of the elevator's buttons. All we're left with is some dim lighting and stuffiness. A lot of stuffiness. The air is quite literally choking us. I can barely breathe as I write this. I'm taking deep, heavy breaths. My phone screen is covered with sweat and I'm constantly wiping it with my shirt so I can type this. God. There's some sort of screaming. No, not from us. No one in the elevator is making a sound. The screams are coming from outside the elevator. Hideous, hideous howls. Loud, deafening screeches and wails. I think I even hear laughter. What the fuck is going on? And oh my god, this heat. Someone just touched the elevator door and his hand is fucking burnt. It's all red and callous looking. The elevator is dropping faster. Okay, it stopped. We just hit the bottom. It slowed down first, and then it just gently stopped. It's quiet right now. Very, very quiet. But my god, is it hot. Everyone's forehead is dripping and the floor is covered with sweat. Something just hit the elevator. It was very loud. Wait, it just happened again. By the sound of it, it must be something very large because the elevator just slightly shook. The screams are back again. God, they're awful. It sounds like an army of them, like 10,000 voices joined together. Okay, there's a heavy, very loud vibration, and the screaming is still going on. The elevator is shaking at what feels and sounds like hands banging against it. A mob of them. No one is calm right now, they're all panicking. But I'm trying to write this, and as difficult as it will be, I can't panic. I must absolutely write this. To my family, I hope this reaches you. I'm sorry I wasn't the best son. I really am. Even now I'm doing something I'm not supposed to. I should have never done this in the first place. My friends dared me to go inside this building and take this elevator down to the last floor, whose button had no number on it. It was just blank. And I listened. Sorry for not being with you long enough to see the disappointment in your faces at my decision to major in English and write stories for a living. I'm sorry for everything, Mom and Dad. You deserve better than a son who would bring you the pain that's in this letter. You deserve much better than a son who would do that to you. I'm so sorry. We're hearing the loud bending of metal and the doors are slowly opening. Something seems to be prying them open with large black claws. I never thought I'd make the sign of the cross so genuinely. A stroke of heat just entered the elevator at the crack of the doors. It's getting hotter and hotter. We all know what's coming. I can see it on everyone's face. This is the end. God, it's loud in here. I don't think I can write more. I'd quit else to say. Trying to describe much as I can. That woman was just dragged out, her BF too. Therese, fire everywhere ND, they're all dead ND, and by self, WE you do DNT, take this elevator, something just grabbed my leg, I have to post this N.